The amphitheater aboard the Imperial observation ship Orax was alive with the murmurs of countless alien dignitaries, each one cloaked in the finery of their species, their eyes fixed on the massive holographic display floating at the center of the chamber. Beyond it, through the great observation window, the lush jungle moon of Velcura rotated slowly against the stars. "The human is still alive," High Regent Calvis of the Valari hissed, his frilled tendrils rippling with disbelief. "Unarmed, unequipped," replied Sithra of the Varn Dominion, her four crystal eyes narrowed. "Dropped into Velcara's alpha predator zone. He should have been torn apart within the first hour. He's a primitive. He doesn't even have neural implants," another scoffed. "This is becoming a farce." They turned back to the display. The screen shimmered into clarity. Sergeant Elias Ward stood shirtless and bleeding in a thicket of dense alien flora, his chest rising and falling with measured control. Mud was smeared across his skin, camouflaging his body. He held a sharpened length of bone in one hand and the bloodied fang of a slain beast in the other. Around him, the jungle echoed with the howls and screeches of predators. But Elias remained still, coiled, patient. Elias hadn't spoken since the drop. When the Empire's emissaries came to Earth, they promised peace, but only after a trial of proving. A ceremonial test, they said, more like a sadistic performance, a way to demonstrate dominance. They hadn't expected Earth's candidate to volunteer without hesitation. He was a relic of Earth's forgotten wars, a special forces survivor of black operations no one ever spoke of. They'd given him no weapons, no armor. Only the promise that if he survived for 72 hours on Velcura, humanity would be granted observer status in the Empire. It had been 38 hours, and he had already killed 4 of the galaxy's apex predators. The first had been a Velcaran Riptylon, an 8-foot, feathered lizard with claws like scythes and a roar that shook trees. Elias took it down with a pit trap and a broken rib from its own fallen mate. The second came at night, a Grimhowl, pack hunter, all muscle and muscle memory. He broke its spine with a branch, crushed its skull with a rock. The third and fourth came together, hive-linked stalkers operating with synchronized telepathy. Elias isolated them with noise mimicry and ambushed them separately, driving a shattered femur into one's eye socket, wrestling the other into a bog and drowning it. The watching nobles had expected a bloodbath. Instead, they were watching a masterclass in applied violence. Now, a new threat approached, one no other sapient had ever survived. The Skarn Tyrant, apex of apexes. 10 feet tall, built like a nightmare forged from sinew and scale, eyes glowing amber, its breath misting with toxin vapor. The ultimate predator, used by the Empire to execute death row criminals for entertainment. This was meant to be the finale, a show of mercy by ending the trial quickly. Elias didn't run. He dropped into a low crouch, calculating. The beast charged, Earth trembling beneath its massive bulk. At the last second, Elias rolled beneath it, slashing deep across its underside. He came up behind it, leapt onto its back, drove his bone blade between its vertebrae. The Skarn roared, bucked, threw him off, but Elias landed hard, recovered faster. He didn't retreat. He charged. He slammed his shoulder into the beast's knee, dislocating it with a sickening crack. As it stumbled, Elias sprang forward, wrapped both arms around its serpentine neck, and, howling like a demon, snapped it with his bare hands. Silence fell across the amphitheater. Sithra stood slowly. Her voice broke the stunned air. Is this the extent of human strength? Elias knelt over the Skarn's body, breathing heavily. He didn't roar in victory. He didn't raise his fist to the sky. He simply looked up, right at the floating drone that broadcast the trial to billions. And he nodded once. Across the galaxy, millions would replay that nod, again and again. The moment the Galactic Empire began to fear a species it had barely begun to understand. The rain came down in heavy sheets, turning the forest floor of Velcura into a mire of sludge and half-buried bones. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the clearing in harsh white bursts. The corpse of the Skarn Tyrant lay where it had fallen, twisted and broken, its massive frame already swarmed by insect scavengers. Sergeant Elias Ward crouched in the shadows nearby, his eyes scanning the tree-line. Every breath he took was slow, deliberate, invisible to the predators who hunted by heat and movement. He wasn't just surviving now. He was hunting. In the Imperial Conclave, the tension was palpable. Holographic feeds showed Elias stalking deeper into the jungle, tracking something larger than even the Skarn. "He's not trying to escape," said Sithra, her voice tight with both fear and wonder. "He's pushing deeper into the kill zone." "Insanity," muttered a Zalari ambassador. "This is savagery. It proves nothing but his species' instability." "It proves that you don't understand him," Sithra replied, her gaze locked on the feed. "He's not just passing a test. He's sending a message." Across the galaxy, billions were watching, and they were no longer laughing. Elias moved silently through the underbrush, blood still drying on his arms. He was down to only 2 makeshift weapons, a spear made from the Skarn's rib and a curved talon he'd ripped from the Riptolon's foot. He wore armor fashioned from scraps of carapace and sinew, lashed together with vines and nerves. But his most lethal weapon was still his mind. Velkera was supposed to be a perfect trap, every apex predator introduced and monitored, every zone optimized for slaughter. But Elias had turned it into a war zone of his own design. He was marking territory, driving predators into each other's paths, sabotaging nests, poisoning waterholes with crushed venom sacs. The jungle wasn't hunting him anymore. It was avoiding him. That's when he heard it. A deep, low-frequency hum. Not natural, not animal. He crept to the edge of a ravine and saw them. 3 obsidian Vorax, blind, quadrupedal titans with obsidian armor plating and hive intelligence. Empire-made, grown in vats for total combat dominance, rarely released except to erase planetary resistance. Each one weighed several tons. Their sense of smell was so acute they could track blood through solid rock. Alone, one could tear apart a small transport ship. Elias didn't flinch. He reached down, smeared mud and blood across his chest in wide, deliberate stripes. He broke his spear in half and gripped the jagged end like a dagger. And then he ran straight at them. The conclave erupted into chaos. "Call it off," shouted a Brontari delegate. "This is a mockery of the proving." But Sithra raised her hand. "No, we let it run. He's earned that." Elias launched himself off the ravine edge, landing squarely on the back of the lead Vorax. It bucked and shrieked, but he drove the broken spear into a seam in its armor, twisting until black ichor exploded across his face. He rolled off before the others could pounce, dove beneath one's belly, and sliced through its exposed tendons. He moved like a wraith, fast, relentless, efficient. He wasn't stronger than them. He wasn't faster, but he was smarter. He used their bulk against them, driving one into the others, forcing them to trample each other in confusion. He used sound, motion, and pain to manipulate their hive link, feeding them false signals of threat and submission. In 6 brutal minutes, all 3 lay dead. Elias stood, dripping gore, chest heaving, his left arm hanging limp from a deep gash. He didn't cry out. He didn't celebrate. He just turned and walked into the rain. On the Imperial ship, silence reigned. Sithra spoke first, her voice almost reverent. "He's not fighting to survive anymore. He's fighting because he understands this place, and because he knows we're watching." High Regent Caldas sat back in his throne. "We've invited something we don't understand into our galaxy." "No," Sithra corrected. "We invited a man, and now we must reckon with what that word truly means." In the jungles of Velkera, the predators had gone quiet. Elias Ward was not just surviving the trial of proving. He was rewriting it. The Conclave of Galactic High Species convened in emergency session less than 2 hours after the death of the Vorax. For the first time in centuries, the chamber of crystalline walls and anti-grav thrones was silent. Not by order, but by awe. The feed from Velkera still hovered above them, frozen on a single frame. Sergeant Elias Ward, standing atop a mound of predator corpses, rain falling across his blood-streaked face, his one good hand clenched into a fist. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. His eyes, dark and unreadable, looked directly into the observation drone. It wasn't a look of victory. It was a warning. Cythera stood in the center of the chamber, her long cloak trailing behind her. You brought him here for spectacle, to humiliate his kind. Instead, he's shown us who we truly are: soft, detached, incapable of understanding what real survival means. He's a brute, spat High Regent Caldas, his frills twitching in agitation. A throwback from a violent, unregulated world. He should be quarantined, not invited. Cythera turned to him. Tell me, Regent, if a single human can do this with mud and bones, what do you think would happen if we actually threatened their species? Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Caldas seethed. They are unpredictable, unstable. Their minds are wired for chaos. We engineered peace over 10,000 years. What happens when they walk among us? Cythera didn't blink. We evolve, or we prepare to be outmatched. Elias sat in a high-walled cave near Velcara's northern range. His wounds were wrapped in bark strips and soaked moss. The pain was real. His shoulder throbbed with infection. His ribs ached, and every movement stung. But his eyes remained focused. A faint chirp sounded. The drone was still watching. He'd known from the start. This wasn't a trial. It was a message. Humanity wasn't invited into the Empire out of generosity. They were tested because the other species feared what they didn't understand. Their peace wasn't peace, it was stasis. And Earth was a threat to that. So Elias responded in kind, not with diplomacy, but with demonstration. He didn't want fear. He wanted respect. On Earth, the response had already begun. Across the human networks, the broadcast had gone viral. In bars, on suborbital flights, in orbital stations above Mars and Luna, people watched the replay of Elias Ward breaking the Scarn Tyrant's neck, tearing through the Vorex, outwitting the jungle itself. Children wore handmade replicas of his armor. Soldiers rewatched his fights before combat training. And in the halls of the Terran Assembly, senators and generals whispered one question. What happens when the Empire sends someone not like Elias? The conclave reconvened the next day. We cannot ignore what this trial has become, said Cythera. Billions now see the human as something more than a test subject. He's a symbol, a myth. Deny them entry now, and we may spark something we cannot contain. Caldas curled his tendrils. We accept them, and we sow the seeds of our own extinction. Cythera raised her hand. We underestimated them because we measure power in intellect, longevity, and genetic purity. But humans evolve through war, chaos, and loss. They're the apex of adversity, not because they are flawless, but because they are relentless. The vote was held. By the slimmest margin in imperial history, humanity was granted provisional status. Observer level. No vote, no military integration. But they were in. They brought Elias aboard the Orax for medical treatment and debriefing. He said little. When asked why he didn't use the escape flare provided to every participant, he responded simply, because I wasn't done proving my point. Cythera approached him in private. You realize you've terrified them. Elias looked out the viewport, watching Velcara shrink beneath the ship. They needed a reason to take us seriously. She studied him for a long moment. You didn't win them over with diplomacy. You did it with blood and broken bones. Then maybe they should have chosen a different kind of trial. Across the stars, the Empire's foundation trembled, not from war, but from the echo of a man who survived hell and left it standing behind him. The sky over Earth was blue and wide, unmarred by satellites or dreadnoughts. Sergeant Elias Ward stood on the edge of a cliff overlooking a pine valley in what had once been Colorado. Wind tugged at his jacket, and a hawk circled high above, crying into the open air. He had been home for 4 days. He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3. The scars across his body still ached from the Velcaran trials. His left arm was wrapped tight, muscles still repairing. His knuckles would never fully realign. But he didn't care. He hadn't come home to heal. He'd come to remember why he survived. Behind him, footsteps approached. Light, cautious. not military. You're the reason I'm here, came a voice, calm, refined, accented in the lilting cadence of the Varn Dominion. Elias didn't turn. Sithra. She stepped beside him, long coat fluttering in a mountain wind. Her crystalline eyes took in the landscape like it was alien, because it was. Your world is raw, she said. Untamed. It smells of death and birth. I can see how it shaped you. He finally looked at her. You didn't come all this way to talk about trees. Sithra smiled faintly. No, I came because the Conclave appointed me as the first ambassador to Earth. He snorted. That's going to go well. I suspect not, she admitted. Your people don't trust the Empire. Not after the trial. They shouldn't, Elias said flatly. That wasn't a test. It was a trap. They wanted to see if we'd crawl or burn. And you tore your way through it, she said, almost admiringly. The footage of you killing the Vorax was broadcast to over 100 systems. Children reenact your battles. Some call you the first monster. Sound about right. But others, she continued, call you something else. The breaker of beasts. The human who humbled the Empire. You become a symbol, Elias. For better or worse. He turned back to the valley. I didn't ask for that. No, she said softly. But you became it. Because they needed something to fear and respect. Meanwhile, across the Empire, reactions fractured. On the border worlds, humans were welcomed like ancient warriors, invited to train alien soldiers, speak at academies, and consult on survival tactics. But deeper in the core systems, fear festered. In the hidden chambers of the Imperial Bioengineering Division, a vat chamber pulsed with reddish light. Inside, clones twitched in murky fluid, spliced with Homo sapiens DNA, modified for strength and pain resistance. The genetic data gathered from Elias's trial was already weaponized. We cannot afford to be behind them, a technician said as she watched one of the specimens crush a reinforced bar. The lead geneticist nodded grimly. We're not replicating a man. We're replicating a response. Back on Earth, Elias stood at a war memorial etched with names, some real, some erased from official history. His fingers brushed across one. Mason Ward, his brother. Kia, forgotten by every government except Elias. He didn't cry. He hadn't in years. But his hand stayed on the stone longer than it needed to. Behind him, Sithra spoke again. What now, Elias? You've changed everything. Made them see you. He took a deep breath. Now I train the next one. She tilted her head. There will be more? He nodded. The Empire's going to send another test. Maybe not this year, maybe not next. But it's coming. And they won't use beasts next time. They'll use something worse. She was silent for a moment. So you prepare? We always prepare, Elias said. It's what we do. You don't survive Earth by luck. In the quiet of that moment, the wind blew harder, carrying with it the smell of smoke from a distant wildfire. Sithra looked out across the burning horizon. They thought they were taming a savage, she said. Elias's voice was low. Steady. Certain. No, he said. They made one. Across the stars, in data clusters, in children's tales, and in war briefings, one name echoed louder than ever. The man who stood alone, who faced the worst nature could throw at him, and tore it apart with his bare hands. Not because he was a monster, but because he had to be.